G'day and welcome, my name's Cautious Pancake and it's just after Horde night, and what better way to celebrate the success of the Rocket Pit base than to build another one right next door. If you haven't seen the previous video, there's a link in the description and I'll put one up at the end of this video as well, but hang around for now and I'll show you how to make this base from scratch, including a couple of ways to do the digging. First things first, we need to lay out the foundation. For this base I've used a 16 by 16 square, but you can make it a little bigger or smaller if you want to adjust things a little. The main thing to remember is that an 18 by 18 square with a pit underneath is the largest size that you can build with wood frames and wood blocks. So if you want to go bigger than that, you'll need to build directly with concrete or a similar, stronger material. Once the corner blocks are marked out, dig the trench for the edge blocks like shown. And then fill in the trench with blocks like this. This creates the frame that is attached through to the bedrock that the rest of the base will hang from. Once you've done the initial outline, it should look like this. Then it's time to hollow out the inside with your favourite digging tool, just down a single level at this point. Once that's done, it'll look like this. From there, it's time to lay out the foundation, starting with the force field to keep the zombies away from the building and force them to run over the pillars. I'm using the cube 1/2 thin window arch blocks here, which are slightly different from the original force field, but just to show that it's possible to use any of the force field blocks. We're using 3 lines on the left and 3 on the right, with 2 at the back and 4 at the front, so that there's 4 rows of pillars, which is what you need to make sure that the zombies all sort of fall down. The gap that I've left is where the pillars will go. With all the end pieces in place, let's grab the filler middle piece, the cube half thin window, and start to fill them all in. Once you're done building the force field, here's how it's going to look. As you can see, it's really starting to take shape. The square in the middle is where we need to start filling in now. Copy this shape and fill in blocks. This is going to be the foundation for the base where we stand and fight. Add in the extra walls for either side of the doorway that the zombies can in theory come into. At least that's what their pathing will tell them. And then continue around the base, filling in the floor and adding in the walls as we go, just so we know where the walls are going to be. Once that's done, add a second and then third layer on top of the walls to build the base up to its maximum height. With the base now complete, it's time to work on the interior, starting with the alcove wall. This blocks the line of sight for cops, means we don't get any spit coming through. Then we can just add in the roof over the alcove. Leave that for a minute so that we can still get in and out. Speaking of which, let's just double check. Yes, that is lined up with the pit. And then it's time to pull out a block for where our ladder down to the underbase pit will go. Next we need to do our roof, and to make it look like there's a bit more space rather than putting blocks up, we will use the plate and rotate that so that it's above the head. You still can't put any storage or lighting or anything up there because it'll just look weird, but it does make it feel a little roomier on the inside since this is only a 3-block high base. You could always just add another layer if you wanted to not mess around with different blocks, and add another row of blocks on top. And while we're here messing with the roof, we should remove that. That way then we have a little hole in the roof for our ladder to get in and out. Oop, falling in that one. That's looking pretty well done for the inside. Let's put up our ladder. And also put one up on the outside. Hopefully in the right spot. Yep. Nope. Yep. There we go. Alright, well that's pretty much the outside of the base done. Time to finish off one more thing inside, and that's the space that we need for the two cellar doors. We need it to line up with our hatch and leave one row all around it of blocks so that we can move around and fall along. That's the hole that we need. There's our hatch. There's our entrance. And I think we are pretty much done for the core of the base structure. Actually, now that I see it from the outside, there is something that I don't like with the ladder positioning, and that is it lines up with the cellar door, and if you mistakenly leave it open and come off that ladder, you're going to fall straight down into the bottom of the pit. So what I'm going to do is just move it over into the corner, grab another ladder again, and that should mean that if you do come flying over the top, you're not going to end falling down into the pit below. Okay, and now it's time to dig. Starting where the poles will go, dig down 3 blocks through the whole 3x4 space. Once the initial pit is done, it's time to start digging out the same 3 block space underneath the whole zombie force field. One thing to keep in mind though is that we need to keep track where the deep shaft will go so that we can keep digging it later. One way to do that is to mark the outside of the area temporarily with some wood frames, and then dig out 1 extra block so we know where to come back to later, then remove the wood frames. Once that's done, it's back to digging out 3 blocks of dirt underneath the whole zombie force field. Now, although the digging isn't quite complete, at this point you can see that the base is freestanding, or I guess free hanging. If we turn on stability mode, you can also see that the only green is on the outer edge blocks, and the base is fully suspended over the pit from those blocks. And while we're here, the other thing we need to do is mark out the boundary for the deeper part of the pit, which is where we want the zombies to gather. This needs to be under the cellar doors, so we start by laying out some blocks that show the edge of the area that we want to dig. The other thing we need to do is make sure that the pit area extends over to the hatch so that we can use our ladder to get down and access the pit after Horde night. We also need to make sure that the pit will connect up to the area where the zombies fall and create the path through that way. I'm making this a little smaller and a little tighter than the original base, which I showed in the previous video, just to demonstrate that you can cut out some of the digging that's required, which just saves a little bit of time and effort. From there, it is simply a matter of following this shape down an additional 7 blocks. Don't forget to bring some wood frames with you though, so that you can climb out again afterwards. And here's how the pit should look once you're finished with the digging. From there, it's just a matter of tidying up this top area to make the dirt nice and flat and ensure that the force field operates correctly. With the pit now complete, it's time to move on to the final few parts, the first of which is the access ladder. If we extend the ladder down, you can see with the smaller pit size that we've introduced in this build, the ladder pushes up against the edge of the pit. This is going to cause problems if and when the zombies land on the top tier of the dirt. They can run around and access the base up through this ladder. What we need to do instead is move the access ladder over a little bit so that when the ladder extends down into the pit, it's not accessible by any of the zombies so that they can't climb up into the base. Then we need to add the cellar doors for a little bit of protection inside and to stop us falling down to our deaths some of the time. We also need the double railings to block off the entrance in case any zombies try and make it in. We also need the poles for the entrance. These consist of the pole centered at the first and third rows, followed by the pole half-centered for the second and fourth rows. And lastly, for some visibility, we need to add this front window so that we can see the zombies coming in case they get stuck on the poles. If you want to get a little bit fancy, you can use one of the trellis blocks like this trellis diamond. But since I'm boring, I'm going to remove these and use some normal railing blocks just so that it matches the rest of the entrance. And there we go, one window full of rails, and we can shoot through nicely. Alrighty, after a quick conversion over to concrete, we should be ready to go for a little Horde night test just to make sure that everything still works. So let's hop on inside, open up our doors, and hit the Horde. Okay, Horde night's underway. I'm not going to run a full Horde night. What I want to do with this little test is just check that the build is obviously valid and working still. Also want to check how these railing windows go, especially with that corner block removed. We should get better shots on any zombies that get stuck. And also with the smaller pit down below, which is a little more constrained, whether that makes it easier or harder to target the zombies with molotovs and explosives. You can still obviously get in a molotov underneath where they fall down, so that's good. Sounds like we've got someone in the entryway, which is nice and accessible. Although that's no different to the previous one. Try another Molotov down where they stand below us. That works nicely still. Pipe bombs. Well, that one's taking a horrid bounce. Let's try that again. That's better. Yeah, 10k early on. That should be fine. So I think if anything that works a little better because they're more grouped up. Oh, and that works much better. So that zombie was stuck on the railing, on the poles and attacking the building. Before we couldn't really get a shot on them, whereas that was nice and easy to hit. So all in all, I think this version is just as good, if not slightly better, with the tighter groupings of the zombies below and easier targeting of the zombies stuck on the poles. Alright, so I promised an alternative approach to digging the pit for this base, and it may come as no surprise that since we're spec'd into demolitions, that we can use a stack of dynamite instead of spending ages digging out the ground manually. I'm going to give myself a little platform to stand on, so I can hopefully just drop the dynamite in the same spot each time, and keep a fairly narrow hole going down. Well, that's terrible. Ooh. And that's failed. Alright, stuff it. Let's just keep going and just try and get them roughly in the middle. And with that we have a 10 block deep hole, which is the same depth as the previous build, but in probably about a 10th of the time, a 20th of the time. The only downside being is that the hole is a little wider and a little less precise, which means we then have to adapt the build on top of it to fit, and potentially fill in some of the areas of the hole to keep the zombies constrained to where we want the explosives to go. From here, the build goes mostly the same as before, so I won't run through it all again. Just remember to fill in the pit for areas you don't want the zombies to go, where the dirt would have been from the original build. And that's it for this build guide. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this useful. Please let me know if you've got any tips that would make building this base easier. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this one, please consider subscribing.